What's up guys, it's James Allen, the out-of-state investor, and recently we've seen a lot of articles talking about how the US is officially in an economic recession. We've seen news reporters talking about this, we've seen economists talking about this, and we've even seen many YouTubers claiming that we are officially in a recession. We've even seen photos and memes going on Twitter and Instagram, making the White House look extremely hypocritical as they deny the fact that we're in an economic recession. So are we in a recession right now? What does the future hold for the US economy, and what can you do to take advantage of it from a financial standpoint? Well, I answer all those questions in today's video, but before I get started, do me a favor, support the channel by smashing that like button, and if you haven't already done so, definitely subscribe and hit that notification bell to watch more content like this. And with that said, let's jump into it. We've been hearing all about how the US economy has finally reached the point of being in a recession. The media's been reporting on it, it's been making the rounds in social media, yet at the same time the Federal Reserve and the White House are claiming that that is absolutely not the case and that we are not in an economic recession. So is the media lying, or is the White House trying to cover up a failing economy? Well, many people have pointed out that the technical definition of an economic recession is 2 consecutive quarters of negative GDP, and that's your gross domestic product. Now, the way you figure out your GDP is you basically add up the values or prices of your goods and services throughout the economy. So the more services and goods you produce and sell throughout the economy, the higher the GDP, which represents a stronger economy. So when you have 2 consecutive quarters of negative GDP, in the past it's been a great signal of what could be an economic recession. However, there is one problem with this 2 consecutive quarter rule, and that's that it's not really a hard and fast rule. It's really a rule of thumb, not the automatic word. Now think of it like this. Imagine that you have 2 consecutive quarters of negative 0.1% GDP. You're basically at the same amount of GDP you were in the previous quarter. But let's say at the same time of this, you got jobs booming, you have unemployment low, and then let's say consumers are still spending. Now that doesn't really sound to me like an economy that's failing or an economy that's in a recession, and that's because it really isn't. So as you can see, it's a little bit more nuanced than just simply 2 consecutive negative GDP quarters to determine whether or not we're in an economic recession. But people like to create these talking points, taking the facts they want to take and ignoring the other things that affect their narratives, such as the last 10 times we've experienced 2 consecutive quarters of negative GDP, we called it a recession. Or ever since 1948, when this has happened with 2 negative quarters of GDP, we've called it a recession. Now both of these are factually true, but if you look back a little bit further to the year 1947, you're going to find there's something pretty special about the year 1947. You see, 1947 was the last time that we had 2 consecutive quarters of negative GDP, and we didn't call it an economic recession. So what made 1947 different than the 12 other recessions we declared after it? Well, to put it simply, it was doing good in pretty much every other category. The unemployment rate was as low as 3.6%, which historically is great. Job growth was still taking place. People were still spending money, and so as a result, when they looked at the economic picture as a whole, it didn't make sense to call it an economic recession just because of 2 consecutive quarters of negative GDP. Now, the reason why something like this hasn't happened since 1947 is because it's a rare occurrence for something like this to happen, where you can have 2 quarters of negative GDP, but at the same time have a strong economy where job growth is taking place, where unemployment is low, where consumer spending is strong, where industrial production is strong. Those things don't normally take place at the same time as a declining GDP. In fact, if you looked at the last 12 recessions, you would see that every single time unemployment skyrocketed during those economic recessions, but 1947 was the exception to the rule. So if you don't define a recession with 2 consecutive quarters of negative GDP, then what do you do to actually define one? Well, the reality is there's actually no hard definition of what a recession is. It's a decision that's made up by a committee. It's called the Business Cycle Dating Committee, and this committee is made up of 8 individuals, 8 highly regarded economists, and those individuals are the ones that officially declare whether or not the United States is in an economic recession. Now, this committee is under the umbrella of the National Bureau of Economic Research. They're the ones that actually decide who is on this committee, which is a privately owned nonprofit organization. Now, when these 8 economists try to decide whether or not the US is in a recession, they actually look at 6 different factors to determine that. They look at real personal income minus transfer payments, which in essence is your income after accounting for inflation. They look at non-farm payroll, which is basically all the jobs, what their wages are, not counting things like farmers, certain government jobs, maybe babysitters, people that work at home like that. They also look at employment. They look at personal consumption, which is basically how much people spend on goods and services. They look at retail sales, and they look at industrial production. So if we were to look at those factors today, let's start with unemployment to get an idea of how jobs are doing. We're currently sitting at a 3.6% unemployment rate, which is pretty much the best unemployment rate we've had since basically 1969. Wages are up over 5.1% year over year, which is stronger than they usually are. We see retail sales are up over 1% year over year as of June. Industrial production is up over 4.2%. Consumer spending is up over 6.8%. And real income minus transfer payments is up over 1.4% year over year. And then you take a look at our GDP, which has gone down 2 consecutive quarters. We saw a negative 1.6% in Q1, and then we saw a negative 0.9% in Q2. Now, if you were to compare these numbers with the economic recession of 2008, we would see that in Q4 of 2008, we saw a negative 8.5% decline, and then in Q1 of 2019, we saw a negative 4.4%, so significantly higher than what we've seen recently with these GDP numbers. And if I was to take it a step further, if we took the worst quarter out of these two, the negative 1.6%, and compared it with all the economic recessions we've seen since 1947, there's over 25 quarters that we can pick out that were worse than the worst quarter we've had out of these two quarters. So when you take that into account, along with all the positive attributes in the economy currently we just went over, you can see that it's not hard to see why we're not currently in an economic recession. Now, that's not to say in the months ahead that we won't enter an economic recession, because if the Fed continues its plan, then it's very likely we will enter an economic recession. Now, let me explain what I mean by that. The Federal Reserve, as we know, has been starting to raise interest rates. They've raised it from 0% up to about 2.25%, and they've made plans to raise again in September, most likely again in November or December as well, planning to raise interest rates all the way up to about 3.25, 3.5%. In addition to that, they've also made it known that they're starting to offload their balance sheet. They're non-renewing these treasury bonds as they start to mature. That started in June this year, and that's going to continue until probably at least the end of 2024. Now, all of this has been an effort to reduce the amount of inflation we're feeling in America, because recently we've been told we're sitting at a 9.1% increase year over year in inflation. So by doing what they plan to do, it should help in terms of reducing the amount of inflation that we feel, but at the same time, the con with this, and why it isn't such an easy decision to just do this every time that inflation comes into play, is it has a negative effect on the economy. As interest rates go up, people are less likely to borrow money, which does hurt the economy and hurts companies' bottom line. That can affect companies to the point where they may need to fire employees just to survive, which in turn hurts the unemployment rate, which also hurts job growth, and as a whole, the economy at that point may be declared in an economic recession. Now, this is what you can expect. As the Fed raises interest rates, you can expect things like HELOCs, adjustable rate mortgages, credit cards, personal loans, car loans, all of that is going to start to go up. In addition to that, as they start to offload these assets, these treasuries and mortgage-backed securities, that hurts mortgage rates and causes them to go up as well. In fact, the whole reason we even got low mortgage rates to begin with is because they were buying about $120 billion of these treasuries and mortgage-backed securities to start with. That was artificially getting us down to these record low mortgage rates. Now, some people might be wondering, well, then if that's the case and they already started doing this in June, then why have mortgage rates recently been going down? Well, the reality is that when people feel we're about to hit a recession, what they do is they run to bonds for safety. And since bonds are largely tied to mortgage rates, it can have an effect on lowering those mortgage rates because a massive sense of demand has gone towards those kind of products. So what can you do to take advantage of today's economy? Well, I'll tell you right now, as the Federal Reserve raises interest rates, one of the good things that happens with that is you start to see savings rates go up as well. So I would highly recommend to search for a good high yield savings account. We've already started to see these go up dramatically. We've seen them go up to the 1.5%, 2% range, where you can just have your money, your spare money that's sitting aside in the bank right now. You can put it in one of these high yield savings accounts earning about 2% annually. Now, one place I would recommend using, and I'm not sponsored by these guys, I'm just simply recommending because I'm doing this right now, is I'm using Marcus Gold Goldman Sachs, and they're offering a 1.5% savings rate, but on top of that, you actually get an additional 1% for the first 3 months. If you use my code in the description below, it will give you 3 months of an extra 1% on top of your 1.5%. And on top of that, if you share it with your friends, you'll have your own referral code. You can actually extend that out up to 5 friends, so you could get up to 15 months of an extra 1% on top of that savings rate. Now, what I particularly like about this Marcus Goldman Sachs high yield savings account is that there is no minimum amount required. So you don't have to keep a $3,000 balance, a $5,000 balance. So if you wanted to withdraw basically all your savings at one point but hold on to that account, there's no penalty for that. You can withdraw as much as you want. You can put as much as you want in, up to about, I think, like $3 million. So therefore, it's basically like having another bank account at your regular bank, except you're going to make a lot more money on it. Now, aside from high yield savings account, I always recommend this during a recession, actually in any season of life really, is I'm going to highly recommend to invest in real estate, especially cash flowing real estate, because right now, whatever the market's doing, if you have that monthly cash flow coming through, then it doesn't really matter as much what the market is doing, because if you're holding for the long run, then long run real estate will go back up because there is a limited supply in the amount of land that you can buy. And because of that, real estate is a finite investment. And so that's what makes it valuable. That creates the intrinsic value of real estate. And so real estate is always going to be a very good investment, whether you're in a recession or you're in a bull market. Now, some people might say, well, if there's a recession, aren't the rents going to go down? Well, the reality is that so many people have been priced out of the housing market. What do? They still need a place to live, so they're going to go and rent a house instead. So if you're looking to buy a rental house, you're in the perfect place of people that are going to be flooding the rental market, which is already dealing with a huge lack of supply to begin with. But then you add all these potential home buyers that can't afford to buy a home anymore. Now they're going to rent a home, which creates even more upward pressure on rents. So I truly don't believe the rents are going to be going down anytime soon. I feel like they're only going to be going upwards from here to catch up to the insane growth we've seen in the prices. Now, if you want to learn more about real estate investing, the good news is that you can actually watch a lot of those kind of YouTube videos on my channel here. I have a lot of videos explaining how to get started in real estate investing, especially if you live in expensive markets. You can actually invest out of state. These days with technology, there's so much opportunity to take advantage of that. So if you haven't already done so, definitely check out some of those videos. So with that said, I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. If you gained any value today, do me a favor and support the channel by smashing that like button. And if you haven't already done so, definitely subscribe and hit that notification bell to watch more content like this. Also, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think we're in an economic recession right now? Finally, follow me on Instagram and TikTok at The Out of State Investor. And if you enjoyed today's video and want to learn more about real estate investing, definitely check out one of these two videos right over here. And with that said, I'll see you on the next one.